I want everyone to go back to the very first module listed in our course, the syllabus module. I'm going to point you to a document called the Egregious Errors List, which I'm going to open up right now. The reason why I'm pointing it out is because I want to talk about a final step you can take before turning your essay in that's going to make some really significant improvements in your work without going to a lot of work. The reason why it's important is because there are some common errors that people tend to make that are pretty easy to correct. And it's really, to me, it's just some cleanup that needs to happen. And if you give yourself enough time to do some of this cleanup or proofreading activity once your rough draft is finished, you can really make a significant improvement in your essay 3, any of them, but we're working on essay 3 right now. So as we look at this egregious errors list, egregious means really terrible, by the way. I want to point out a few things. The great thing about computers is that if you find yourself using, for example, you and your second person, which I've written on many people's essays to avoid, it's pretty easy using your find function on your word processing program to search for you and your and try to think of a slightly different way to rewrite your sentence. So that's one. Don't use second person. Why? Because it's too casual. It's very conversational. It's just not quite formal enough for an academic essay. Also, in terms of argument, once you start using you or your, in a way you are telling the reader what to think. You're imposing your opinion on the reader, and most people don't respond very well to that. So use first person or third person. And I really, I guess I would say I have a pet peeve kind of against using one. I know a lot of people have used that in their essays, and I've tried not to mark it because it can be correct. But one sounds very, it's almost doing the opposite. It sounds overly formal. And I just don't see it being used that often in academic essays anymore. And also many people tend to make a lot of mistakes when they try to use one. So check out the examples here and think about them. Again, if you just naturally write that way, it's easy to use the search function in your program to find those words and try to eliminate them. Another conversational thing that happens is starting, like I just said, starting sentences with these little tags that are really pauses in our speaking and writing because we're trying to buy some time to think about what we're going to say next. But the beauty of writing is we have time to revise our work and take those little pauses out. And so when you start a sentence with yes, no, well, and, or but, or any other little conjunction like that, it sounds very conversational. Take it out. All you have to do is cut it. Hit the delete key. Another thing to think about is contractions. Some teachers you'll run into in the future, like, we don't like contractions at all. I don't mind them. I like both. I think you can balance it. Sometimes I think if we force ourselves to use no contractions at all, we can end up making our sentences sound a little, again, overly formal and not really like ourselves at all. And so I don't mind them. I would suggest you just pay attention to your future teachers because people have some strong opinions about that one. Typos are obvious. There's a few common ones listed there. Please read through them. And also, I'm going to ask you to avoid these strategies that are overused. One is asking questions, and I've defined there what a rhetorical question actually is. But somehow people think it's clever to ask a question and then answer it immediately. And I know some writing textbooks even suggest that as an interesting strategy. And I actually think it's terrible. Particularly in the context of making an argument, you just make yourself sound indecisive, which is the last way you want to sound when you're trying to convince people of something. The third bullet there, in conclusion, you know what? We can see it's your final paragraph. You do not need the words in conclusion. If you've done a good job, setting up your final point, it should be also pretty obvious, even if we don't get the visual, that it's your final paragraph and it's your final point and it's the end. We don't need the additional kind of obvious words in conclusion. Also, in today's society and nowadays, I think these are mostly unnecessary. Again, they're just overused. And so if you see yourself using those, search for them, seek them out, and just think of something else to say, or often just leave it out. Your sentence will be even better if you just leave it out. And then the unnecessary, in my opinion, I think, or I believe, also just it's just a bad habit. It's just, I think of it along the lines of the unnecessary and, but, or yes, start. It's a filler. It's a space filler. And most of the time, your sentence will be better if you leave it out. Now, there are some examples from our They Say, I Say textbook that say, if you think there's a possibility the reader may be confused between an author's opinion that you're discussing and your own opinion, then it could be acceptable. So this is specifically about the unnecessary use of I think or I believe or in my opinion. And I would say that's more than 90% of them are unnecessary. So do some of these quick checks and you may be surprised at how much better your writing sounds.